Welcome, everybody, to this special episode of the One and All podcast. We are giving you a first look into our brand new series called Wild Life. And I am hopping on a Zoom call today with Jeff Vines, and we are so excited to hear from Jeff what this series is going to be all about and why you need to make sure you are attending and watching every message. So, Jeff, thank you so much for your time, and maybe let us know a little bit about this series called Wild Life.
Yeah, well, talking about wild life, that's what I feel like out here in Kentucky. It reminds me of my heritage. These are my people, man. But when you're away from them for a long time, you forget that things are quite different over here in the Midwest. But we're having a great time. And I'm glad we're doing this because it reminds me of when Jesus told the disciples, how I have longed to eat this meal with you. Well, how I have longed to preach this sermon series. Because this is the culmination of a lifetime of ministry. And over ministry, you start to see some commonality in principles. That is that I began to learn that there are some principles you can apply to your life that although you are saved by grace through faith, and although you can never be more significant or more loved than you are right now because of Jesus, it is true that we can make decisions in our lives to position ourselves in places where God can use us in enormous ways, immeasurably more than we could ever hope for or ask for. So I started putting this together probably about 3 years ago. What are those governing principles? What are the commonalities in lives that achieve greatness? Because in reality, we think when we see somebody that's great, that they've obviously been great all their lives and they've had everything given to them easily. So, of course, they had privilege and they had everything just fell right in their lap. So, of course, they're successful. But the reality is that those who have suffered the most have accomplished the greatest. And it's really all those hidden things that happen to them in their lives and their response to those things that turn them into great servants of God. So I want to go look at specifically one story, one narrative in the Old Testament. Judges 6, 7, and 8 tell us the narrative of Gideon. I've preached on it before. There have been 1,000 sermons preached on it before. But then I started reviewing it recently, and I realized that all 7 principles that I've been putting together in my notes can be seen in Gideon's life. So I thought, wow, here we go then. One life, one narrative over 7 weeks to give us 7 principles. We'll concentrate on one principle at a time. And that excites me, Aaron, because I don't have to throw everything together in one sermon. I can do one principle at a time. And I believe these are so important that if you can get those into your life and you can either memorize them or just jot them down somewhere so that it governs the way you respond to everything that happens to you on a given day, then I believe those type of responses will lead to what we call the wild life. And
that's great.
My generation, when they thought about wildness, thought about, a buzz haircut and rock and roll music,
Right.
But now the next generation looks at the wild life as a life that is like, wow, how did you do that? Man, that's wild. How are you able to bring that out of that? And that's exactly the type of life that the Spirit of God enables us to live as we see things that the world may not see. And I believe if we live this way, Aaron, that people will look at us and say, wow, man, you are compelling. Other people will think we're just flat out crazy or we're a wild man. But in reality, whatever we do, it'll be compelling.
Yes. So what I'm hearing is we are going to look at 7 principles over 7 weeks so we can really dive into each of these principles that are going to help guide our wild lives. But I'm also hearing that it's not going to these 7 principles don't create a less wild life. In fact, we still look wild in a different way to the people around us. Do you want to kind of spend some time talking about, because I've heard that you talk about this in different messages, that our lives should look different, but looking different doesn't necessarily mean looking more successful, doesn't look by worldly standards, looking more in control, those sorts of things. But our actions as true followers of Jesus can actually look more wild, where people look at us and they notice something different. So this is not a series about how to make your life less chaotic. It is in a sense, but it's about these 7 principles leading you to a different kind of wild. Do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've often used the quote by G.K. Chesterton about we Christ followers are different in a major way to the unbelieving world. And that is, The unbelieving world has moments of joy, but sorrow is central because they haven't answered the big questions of life. So it's not to say that if you're not a believer, you can't have fun or can't have moments of joy. Of course you are. As a Christ follower, though, the difference is we have a centralized joy where sorrow only becomes peripheral. We still have sorrow. We still suffer. We still have setbacks. I mean, we're not immune to that, but we live with a centralized joy because the bigger questions of life have been answered. And so when you realize that, you start to live in such a way that people will look at you and say, man, that's crazy. And yet it works for you. For instance, let's go back. One of my favorite examples is about a year ago, my friend Tony Bennett, who coaches at Virginia, they offered him a big raise, and he turned it down. This made headlines. He says, "No, don't give me more money. I have enough.
I remember that.
To the staff. I want to share it. Those people who have." And we look at that and say, "Man, who does that? Who turns down cash and gives it away?" Well, you do when you have the big questions answered. So Tony has positioned himself to be used in a fantastic way by God, but it's going to look wild to other people. And so I'm saying there are 7 principles by which you live that when you live that way, actually it does bring a centralized joy, but it looks totally different to everybody else. It's wild.
That's right. And so if somebody's listening to this and they're trying to judge whether this applies to them or not, maybe without going into the principles, because we want each week to be worth going to, and we're not going to give any of the 7 principles away, but because we want you to come and listen to the entirety of this series. But what would be some reasons that somebody would come to this, and maybe contextually in different life stages, maybe even non-Christians, like people who aren't yet following Jesus, what is this series who is it going to speak to?
You know what, Aaron? 2 things in response to that. Number one, these principles, if you put them into play in your life, whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, they work. You take a book like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, those aren't biblical principles, and yet they are. Yet those same kind of truths are found in Scripture. So whether you're a believer or non-believer, the truth is the truth, pragmatically, no matter what, no matter who came up with it, no matter who originated. The second thing is this. Man, I detest platitudes. I just can't stand platitudes. It's so easy to say, well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, yeah, okay. But how pragmatically am I going to work that out in my life? These are not platitudes. These 7 principles are not platitudes. Matter of fact, they're anything but that. They don't rhyme. It's not an acrostic. It's basically a principle that if you employ in your life let me give you just one quick example. In the first message, I talk about a famous president way in the past, nobody present, but way in the past, I talk about a president whose life was a miserable failure. And yet this president probably accomplished more than any president before or after. Now, why is the question? So why? So this principle is going to go way beyond, but I find it interesting that God's been talking about this for 2,000 years, or actually more like 4,000 years. So come on, no matter who you are, businessman, you run a business, a day-to-day, if you run what we used to call in New Zealand a creche, if you run a child care center, it doesn't matter what you do. These principles, if they're as solid as I believe that they are going to apply across the board.
And is this something that for our youth that they can practice straight away?
I would say that this is especially for our youth, Aaron, because here's the deal. Most of us wait too late to start practicing them. If you start practicing them when you're young, they become such a habit to you. They become a way of life, and you will find yourself moving from greatness to greatness to greatness. And let me go back to Tony Bennett. Tony's a very special guy because he's been practicing these principles since he was in his teenage years. You don't just become who he's become overnight. It's got to be something you sink your teeth into, and it becomes a way of life. Then you're not even trying to practice them. They just become part of your DNA.
Yes. Yeah. And I remember being a youth. I'm not as far removed as some people. It's very near to me, but just trying to, I wasn't going to say that, Jeff, you're as youthful as they come. But just really figuring out, such a critical time, figuring out who you are, who you're going to become. And we're wrestling with all these questions, but we don't always have the answers or the principles or these guiding principles that are grounded in Scripture to lead us and guide us. And I did want to touch on that just for a little bit. How is this different? And you did mention some things, but I want to address the question straight away. How is this different than a self-help series or a self-help book or the 7 principles? What actually makes it different?
Well, let's think about that for a moment. There's really only one of 2 scenarios that exist in life, really, if we're honest. Either one, you're here by accident, and there's no meaning, and there's no purpose, and everything's just dumb bad luck, and maybe things will happen good for you, maybe they won't, but there's no rhyme or reason to it. So if that's the worldview, then you know what? I don't think this or any other sermon's going to help you. I don't think anything's really going to help you. I mean, you may feel better for a little bit of time, but objectively, you're still in a mess. Or God did create the world, and there is meaning and purpose to every person He's created. What makes this different is these principles are tied to the reality of you being created by God and having meaning and purpose in this world. In fact, not only that, but you have specific calling in this world that when you figure out and you apply these principles, you then will live the best life possible for the gifts and talents God has given you. So those are really the only 2 options, Aaron. There's no middle ground. You've either got purpose and meaning or you don't. If you do, these 7 principles, man, God came up with these a long time ago. And I think He wants us, by the way, the beauty of it is Gideon was a loser, man. And we're all losers. Come on. Think about it. We all make mistakes. We blow it. So knowing that, have we forfeited? Have we forfeited our chance? Well, the reason Gideon makes me so encouraged is because this guy did everything wrong. But God, with His loving patience and kindness, said, Gideon, it's okay. Matter of fact, God doesn't even address Gideon's failures. He said, okay, it is what it is, but now where are we going to go from here? And Gideon learns. So Gideon starts off by such a weak person. I mean, he's hiding. He's trying to stomp on the grapes in the wine press, and he's peeking over the edge to make sure the Midianites aren't coming. I mean, he's fearful. There's no courage. But by the end of the story, he's ready to take on a full army of 15,000 warriors with 300 men. Now, why? Come on now. What happened? Why all of a sudden have you become courageous and trusting and just ready to take on the world? See, that's all I want. I just want to have the attitude that, hey, I know the world stinks sometimes and it comes after me with everything it's got, but I just don't want to let it beat me. I want to get on top of it and say, man, you're not going to beat me. And there's attitudes that have to come into play. And what I really like about the series, you see them in great leaders of the past, whether it be a Winston Churchill or an Abraham Lincoln or a Michael Jordan or anybody who's accomplished anything at all, anybody that's accomplished greatness, the hidden gems in their lives are associated with these 7 principles.
Wow. I can't wait. I have to ask, do you have a favorite of the 7? You need all the 7. And so, but I am curious, does Jeff Vines have a favorite of the 7? And I'm just curious, the week number, you don't have to tell us what it is. Yeah. Just curious, is there a favorite?
Absolutely. And it's week number 6. And it has sustained me. It has sustained me in the most difficult times when I started doubting and thinking, you know what? I'm living these principles, but I got to tell you, I'm having a hard time right now. And then all of a sudden, I remember the 6th principle. And I can't tell you how many times, Aaron, that principle has become true because there's a cause and effect related to it. If I do this, God promises He'll do this. Okay, God, you better show up.
Right. Yes. Well, Jeff, as we wrap up here, thank you so much for your time joining us from Lexington, Kentucky. You are doing so many things right now, representing One and All. The impact of this church is unbelievable. So I just want to celebrate all that God is doing in and through our church with you just being in Lexington. But do you have any final thoughts? Maybe one last reason somebody needs to sign up and join for week 1 of this series.
Yeah, again, this is one of those series, Aaron, that it will be truly, truly sad if you miss it just because this is not just one sermon series. This is a series that has been worked on for the last 35 years of my life. And so it's more than theory to me. And sometimes, a couple of the principles, when you hear it at first, you'll think, really? Does it work like that? And only a lifetime experience could say, yes, believe it or not. It works like that. But come on, how many times have you read something and you thought, a lot of the principles, you'll see it and yeah, man, that makes sense. But every once in a while, you'll come across something, and at first you'll say, wait a minute. No. Well, maybe. Well, yeah, now that I think about it, that's what's going to happen numerous times during the series. So even for the sake of learning how leaders who have accomplished so much think, at least for that reason, come to the series.
That's great. Well, you can attend week 1 of this series, Wildlife, October 3rd, 2020. If you happen to be listening to this later, you'll be able to find this series anywhere. We cannot wait. Jeff, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you all in October.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. See you.